Samantha Markle has always been treated like the glitch in the story, the one name the glossy narratives try to skip over. For years, whenever her face appeared on a screen, the headline underneath did the same thing every time. Jealous half-sister, bitter outsider, someone with an agenda. That was the script the world was handed, and for a long time, it seemed to work. But here's the problem with people who actually know your history. They also know your timeline. According to Samantha, she was never trying to tear anyone down. She says she was trying to line things up. She was the first voice to step forward and say, something about Meghan's age doesn't make sense. Not with rage, not with random gossip, but with dates, memories, family milestones she says she watched unfold in real time. While most of us only ever saw the polished version of Meghan's life, Samantha says she was standing behind the scenes, watching the years stack up differently. And like most uncomfortable truths, her words were ignored, until they weren't. At first, the idea that Meghan's age might not match the official narrative sounded like just another conspiracy theory. After all, Meghan's birth date is everywhere, August 4th, 1981. It sits in biographies, royal profiles, media coverage. It's repeated so relentlessly that it feels more like a pillar than a detail. But as Meghan's fame expanded, Samantha and even their father, Thomas Markle, began to notice small things that didn't quite sit right with what they remembered. Interviews where Meghan described her age at certain stages of her acting career, stories about school and early struggles, timelines that, according to them, didn't line up with the birthdays they celebrated and the years they lived through together. None of this proves anything on its own, but once the question is raised, once someone close to the story says, "Look again," you can't help but trace the line yourself. You start to follow the numbers. You start to compare the dates. You start to ask, quietly at first, does this actually fit? According to Samantha and Thomas, there are moments where the math bends, where public claims about age and private memories about age aren't walking in step. And it's from that tension that the theory begins, not from a random blog, but from the people who say they watched Meghan grow up. The more people dug, the more pieces began to surface. Old magazine features, early press blurbs, casting notes and clippings long forgotten. Commentators point to one thing in particular, a youth magazine from the late 1990s, where Meghan's name appears alongside an age that doesn't match the official 1981 timeline. Supporters of Samantha's claims see that as a key piece of evidence. Critics say it could be a misprint, a sloppy editorial error, or just another example of how often media gets basic details wrong. But either way, that little number on a dusty page became gasoline on an already flickering fire. Think about that for a second. Long before there was a Duchess of Sussex, long before palace press offices and global PR teams, there was just a young woman trying to get noticed in an industry obsessed with youth. That's the context Samantha and Thomas point to. If the age was framed a certain way back then, they argue, maybe it wasn't about royalty or titles at all. Maybe it was about opportunity. But if the age is truly what Meghan says it is, then all of these discrepancies are just noise, misremembered memories, bad reporting, confusion layered over time. That's the fork in the road, and it's why this question refuses to die even years later. Because it doesn't just sit on a birth certificate, it spills into everything else. Age affects how we interpret a career, how fast someone made it, how hard the climb really was. Was Meghan a young newcomer breaking into Hollywood in her early 20s? Or, as Samantha suggests, was she older than we were led to believe and fighting for space in an industry already pushing her toward the margins? These aren't just numbers, they're context, and context shapes sympathy. According to Thomas, his own memories tip the balance. He has publicly said he loves both his daughters, but he isn't comfortable with everything one of them has done. He has hinted on camera that there are lies he wishes had never been told. Again, his statements are his perspective, not a court record. But when a father says, "This isn't the way I remember it," people listen. And once you start connecting those dots, Samantha's timeline, Thomas's recollections, old media clippings, the picture that emerges feels very different from the glossy montage played during royal highlight reels. Suddenly, we're not just talking about a duchess with a neat, linear biography. We're looking at a story with pencil marks beneath the ink. Pencil marks that, Samantha claims, were never meant to be seen. From there, commentators say the question grows into something bigger. If there is even a chance the age narrative was adjusted, what else might have been reshaped to fit that version of events? Which details were polished to protect an image? Which parts were quietly edited out? This is where the age story stops being a curiosity and starts feeling like the opening scene of an investigation. Because age doesn't just influence how you see someone's past, it also changes how you understand what came later, especially when it comes to one of the most sensitive chapters in Meghan's life, the pregnancies. Age is just a number, until medicine gets involved. When Meghan and Prince Harry announced they were expecting Archie, the world reacted exactly how palace strategists hoped they would. It was billed as a global moment of joy. A modern prince, a modern duchess, and a baby who symbolized a new chapter for the monarchy. The photos were warm. The interviews were carefully controlled. The tone was pure fairy tale. But behind the images, critics and commentators began asking a different set of questions. Questions rooted not in gossip, but in biology. If Meghan was born in 1981, she was in her late 30s when she became pregnant with Archie. That alone, her supporters argue, is not unusual. Many women today have healthy pregnancies at that age. But if, as Samantha and Thomas have hinted, Meghan is actually older than the official narrative suggests, then the pregnancy falls into a very different risk category, one where doctors tighten protocols, where hospitals increase monitoring, and where timelines become far less flexible than fairy tales like to admit. And it's here that the story, according to skeptics, begins to strain. In his memoir, Harry painted a picture of a calm, dimly lit hospital birth. Gentle music, low lights, and almost spa-like atmosphere. He described a quick progression from labor to delivery to discharge, a story that sounds cinematic, almost too smooth. For most viewers, it was just another chapter in a dramatic life. For some medical professionals and critics online, it became a point of contention. Could that kind of serene, accelerated birth really happen in a top London hospital treating a high-risk mother, watched over by some of the strictest obstetric protocols in the world? Doctors who spoke in general terms, not about Meghan specifically, but about women in that age and risk category, outlined what a typical experience usually looks like. Longer monitoring, more time in recovery, extended observation before discharge. They didn't call Harry's version impossible, but many called it unlikely. And once that word hits a story, unlikely, it plants a seed you can't easily unpick. Add the age question on top of that, and the seed grows. Because if the timeline of Meghan's life is even slightly blurred, then the framing of her pregnancy changes too. Pregnancy at 37 is one story, pregnancy at 42 or 43 is another. Different risk levels, different expectations, different medical realities. And when the real-life procedures don't seem to match the public narrative, critics argue that either the birth story was simplified for public consumption or that there's more to the story than we were told. Supporters push back hard. They insist every woman's labor is unique, that details are often condensed in memoirs, that personal memories are not hospital charts. They argue that building an entire conspiracy from hospital anecdotes and risk charts is both irresponsible and cruel. And they have a point. But the reason this conversation keeps coming back isn't because of one birth story. It's because of the pattern people think they see when they stack all the pieces together. The disputed age, the conflicting timelines, the tightly controlled press narratives, and the reluctance to release documentation that could, theoretically, settle everything in a single page. That's what makes this so powerful as a story, whether you believe the claims or not. Because it isn't really about catching someone in a lie. It's about realizing how fragile a public narrative can be when even one small detail, one number, refuses to fall in line. One magazine page, one old interview, one family memory. Samantha's role in this is impossible to ignore. She was, in many ways, the first crack, the one who said, "Look more closely." Whether you see her as a whistleblower or a wounded relative, her insistence forced people to re-examine things they had accepted without question. Thomas's interviews added another layer, not because he offered documents, but because he offered doubt. And doubt, once spoken by a parent, is difficult to shrug off entirely. But here's the most unsettling part. Even now, with years of debate, mountains of commentary, and countless breakdown videos, the core mystery remains unresolved. Meghan's official documents say one thing, her family's recollections suggest another. Medical logic raises questions about the pregnancy narrative, yet no conclusive proof has been presented that completely confirms or completely destroys Samantha's claims. We are left not with a neat answer, but with a shape, a silhouette of a story that feels managed, curated, adjusted to fit the demands of each new chapter in Meghan's public life. Maybe Meghan's age really is exactly what the records say it is. Maybe every strange detail has a simple, boring explanation. Or maybe, as Samantha and her supporters insist, the truth is hiding in plain sight, buried beneath years of ink and PR and palace-approved timelines. Either way, the illusion has already been disturbed. Once you've seen the mismatched dates, the clashing memories, the improbable timelines, you can't fully return to the fairy tale. You start to see the script marks, the edits, the places where the story feels sharpened just a little too precisely. And that's where this saga leaves us, not with a headline, but with a question. What happens when a life built so carefully in the spotlight collides with the people who remember the shadows? When global narrative meets the family members who say, "That's not how it really was." When age, identity, and motherhood stop being bullet points on a biography and become the focal point of an unresolved mystery. This isn't the moment where everything is solved. This is the moment where more people finally start to look. Because once you tilt the story toward the light, you don't just see the crown, you see the pencil marks underneath. And now that you've seen them, you can't unsee them.